Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and the room is sealed, and your chair is bolted to the floor, and I have the complete works of Kurt Vonnegut. So it's a perfect recipe for torture. TBR torture. So I thought we'd go through some books that I can torture your Amazon wish list with. I have 6 books to show you here, and I have read 3 of them, and I haven't read 3 of them. So I'm gonna start with the ones that I haven't read. We'll go through them together and see what we find. And the first one is, let's see, it's an August release. The name of the author will be vaguely familiar to you. This is Tidelands by Philippa Gregory, with her new publisher. So let's see what they have to say for her. She's at Atria Books now. We couldn't be more thrilled to welcome Philippa Gregory to Atria Books with the publication of Tidelands this August. We're excited to take this legendary #1 best-selling author to newer and bigger audiences with a book that will be a major landmark in her already stellar career. How are they going to give Philippa Gregory a bigger audience? How are they going to do that? A newer audience, sure. Bigger audience? This is one of the best-selling authors in the world. Anyway, what's the book about? This is a novel packed with romance, intrigue, and more. Only Philippa Gregory knows how to take the life of one woman and place it in the sweep of history. Okay, calm down, Seymour. She's not the only one who knows how to do that. Let's see here. Eleanor's story takes place during the English Civil War, when one wrong word or glance could mean accusations of treason and death. Even in this tiny village, tensions are high, and when Eleanor encounters a spy for the exiled King Charles I, her decision to help him is not made lightly. One feels the claustrophobia of life in a tiny town, the exhaustion of the pauper's life, the beauty of the natural surroundings, the intense love that Eleanor has for her son and daughter, and the building passion between her and the spy that ultimately explodes in secrets and results in a heart-stopping conclusion that will leave readers eager for the next book. So this is the first in a series then. Kind of a nice, somber cover to it. Tidelands. This is the new Philippa Gregory. It's an English Civil War novel. Okay, so of course I'm a fan of this author. She can have duds. Some of her books I don't think work, but most of them do. I'm a little worried. I'm a little worried because another really, really enjoyable English female writer of historical fiction, Lindsay Davis. She wrote a great series of Roman murder mysteries set in ancient Rome, book after book after book, each one of them a winner. And then she had a passion project. She wrote an enormous novel set during the English Civil War, and it didn't work. I should try it again, just in case maybe it did work. Although I was so eager for it to work, I think if it had, I would have noticed it. But one way or another, she went right back to writing Roman historical novels, and I'm wondering if publishing history is going to repeat itself. I mean, what's going to happen in 2 years? Are we going to see a new Tudor novel from Philippa Gregory? I hope not. I like it when authors spread their wings, so I will give this a try, and then I'll report back. And this next one is nonfiction, and it is calling to me. It will be consumed fairly quickly. It's from Public Affairs, and it is right up my alley. It is exactly the kind of thing that I love to read. It's edited by Brian Lamb, Susan Swain, and the historical staff at C-SPAN, and it's called The Presidents. It's a big volume. Noted historians rank America's best and worst chief executives, and the book has a chapter on each president, and it is not chronological. It breaks them down. Instead of breaking them down chronologically, it breaks them down according to the top 10, the men in the middle, and then all the rest. So you've got the top, by the rankings of these historians by popular demand or whatever, the top 10 American presidents. You probably want to know who those top 10 are. I'm not going to read them all, but we can at least do the top 10. They are Abraham Lincoln, and that chapter is done by Harold Holzer, who is a great Abraham Lincoln scholar. Then George Washington, of course, he's on there, and that's by Ron Chernow. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is number 3, and that chapter is written by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Theodore Roosevelt is next, and that's done by Douglas Brinkley. So these are best-selling authors, each contributing a chapter here. Dwight Eisenhower is written by William Hitchcock. There's a chapter on Harry Truman that's done by Ida Donald. There's one on Thomas Jefferson by Willard Stern Randall, who's fantastic. Then number 8 is John F. Kennedy, and that is done by Robert Dallek. Number 9 is Ronald Reagan, and that is done by Lou Cannon. These are big names. And finally, number 10 is Lyndon Johnson. Number 10, in the best presidents of all, is Lyndon Johnson. And it's by Robert Caro. And then you've got a whole bunch in the middle and then at the end. And I think, if I remember correctly, the book very pointedly does not include Donald Trump, for the very good reason that history's verdict is out. But let's see here. The crucible of the presidency has forged some of the very best and very worst leaders in our nation's history. Over a period of decades, C-SPAN has surveyed leading historians on America's presidents across 10 categories: public persuasion, crisis leadership, economic management, moral authority, international relations, administrative skills, relations with Congress, setting an agenda, pursuing equal justice for all, and performance within the context of the times. Of those 10 categories, I am only thinking of one where Lyndon Johnson would deserve to be in the top of the list. 1 out of 10. But I guess it'll be up to the writer to convince me otherwise. And this book provides complete pictures of the 43 men who have completed their term. Grover Cleveland was elected twice, non-consecutively. At the end of the book, you will find a conversation between the contributing historians Douglas Brinkley, Edna Green Medford, and Richard Norton Smith about the legacy of Donald Trump. And Richard Norton Smith is also fantastic. So this is when we saw this with the Accidental Presidents, a sweeping presidential panorama done along a theme. This is even bigger. This is even bigger. This is all the presidents ranked by historians according to a set criteria. This is just perfect, Steve book. So that's another one that I haven't read. I will probably be consuming it tonight. And then the third one that I haven't read is it could be touchy. But I'm determined not to rule things out. The reason why it could be touchy is because I believe. Let me make sure that I'm right about this. Yes, okay. The reason that it could be touchy is because this is a YA novel. That's not the touchy part. The touchy part is that it's an own voices, #own voices type thing. And I've made clear on this channel that I think the own voices movement, which in a nutshell means like writes like, is an absolutely fundamental betrayal of everything that an author of fiction ever does. An author of fiction, their whole remit, the whole reason why we pay money to buy their books is because they're good at using their imagination. They're good at stepping into the skin of their characters, no matter what color that skin is in relation to their own. Own voices, especially when it's done like a truncheon, when it's, not only here's a character that I have written and also I am like this character in cultural background or racial type or whatever. Not only that's bad enough. I think that's a little bankrupt. Much worse when it's weaponized. When groups, especially of YA readers, get together on Goodreads and say, well, it's not just that this author isn't the same thing, it's that this author shouldn't write about anything but what they are. Cultural appropriation, I believe, is one of the terms that we have to live with in the 21st century. I hate it. Absolutely hate it. It is Twitter mobbing and virtue signaling combined in some toxic brew that ought to make all of its participants deeply ashamed of themselves. You can write anything you want. Period. You can write anything you want. And how well a job you do will be determined by how well a job you do, not by what you look like in the mirror. And so, of course, when I got this thing and thought, and they're advertising right in the pub sheet that it's own voices, I thought, that's not going to work. It's going to mostly annoy you. But books aren't hashtags. So I'll read you a little about this. This is by Debbie Rigaud, Rigaud, and it's called Truly Madly Royally. That is the cover with all sorts of cartoon drawings on the couple there. Let's see here. Zora Emerson is not here to play. She's enrolled in a prestigious summer program and is ready to use what she's learning to change the world, or at least her corner of New Jersey, for now. Zora is not expecting to vibe with any of her super privileged classmates. I assume that means get along, click, as my generation used to say. She's so shocked. So she's shocked to find she's got chemistry with Owen Whittlesley, who is charming, funny, undeniably cute, and turns out to be literally a prince. As in, his parents are the king and queen of a small European country. Suddenly, Zora's summer is looking a lot more complicated, especially when Owen asks her to be his date at his older brother's wedding. Can her feelings for Owen, not to mention her sense of self, survive the royal chaos? Now, I don't. This is being pushed as Owen Voice's point paperback from Scholastic. I find it hard to believe that Debbie Rigaud, the author of this book, do we have a picture of? Yeah, we have a picture of a. Good Lord, Scholastic. I can barely make out her face. This is her debut novel. That's wonderful. But I don't think even this camera can call up her face. That is just, it's smaller than a thumbnail. Why do they do that? I want to see what she looks like. I'm proud of her for getting a debut novel. But I find it hard to believe that she has fallen in love with European royalty. There's few of them, and most of them are not the kind of creatures that anyone would fall in love with. So I have a feeling that it's just that she comes from, a black family in New Jersey, same as her main character, which is a pretty thin nail to hang Own Voices on. I don't know one way or another what it would be like. It's a debut novel. Excuse me, it's a debut novel, and I'm not going to judge a book on a hashtag. Hashtags are marketing techniques, and books are, more than a year of the heart and soul of the writer. Those are two very different things. So I'm going to give this a try, and I will report back. And then we'll get on to the three that I have read. And we'll start with A Joy, an amazing thing. This is by Glynis Fox, with an introduction by Alison Bechtel. And it is Charlotte Bronte before Jane Eyre. And it's a graphic novel. It is a graphic novel about the Brontes growing up on the moors, with three sisters and Branwell increasingly investing themselves in their imaginary world and the stories that they're telling, watching their disastrous employment experiences, watching their creative lives grow, culminating in the moment when Jane Eyre is published. And I might have resisted this idea before last year, but last year had not only a fantastic adult graphic novel about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, but also had a fairly good one about Hannah Arendt, and an absolutely incredible graphic novel adaptation of The Diary of Anne Frank. Blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. So I went into this, I admit, with a slightly more open mind than I would have ordinarily, and it's amazing. It's amazingly good. I have no idea if these halftones are going to be the finished artwork. I have no idea if the thing's going to be in color or not. This comes out in September, so I'll find out we'll find out together what the finished copy will look like then. But this is amazing. It is not simplified. It is not silly. It is adult and heart-wrenching and ragged, and more than anything, totally convincing in pulling you into the weird world of the Brontes, which is what it has to do. If it gives you a saccharine version of that world, then it won't be any good. If you know anything about the Brontes, it won't be any good. You'll throw it away in disgust. And at first, when I thought maybe I would do that, but no, this is amazing, just amazing. So I highly recommend it. Come September, we'll see what the finished artwork will look like. Then the next one is something we've seen on this channel before. This is the finished copy. And also another thing that I just can't recommend strongly enough. This is by Jeremy Treglone, who is, now that I know what he looks like, he's a serious guy. And this is Mr. Straight Arrow. This is his biography of John Hersey and the author of Hiroshima, this slim book that was originally published as one whole issue of the New Yorker, but then has been in publication ever since in this little book. It's in schools, it's taught and read everywhere in the world, and it's amazing. It's one of those rare works of contemporaneous nonfiction reportage that retains the power to shock, that retains the power to move you. It's impossible not to be moved by Hiroshima, even if you come to it after you've read about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It doesn't matter. It's the way it's done. It's the artistry of what's involved. And the problem goes hand in hand with that. You can see it coming a mile away for someone like John Hersey, for someone like the author. you are subsumed in that one book. It happens all the time. We see it with authors all the time. I don't know of many cases more pronounced than Hersey's, more pronounced where a man is synonymous with one book. And this is a biography of the whole thing. This is his upbringing. This is his wives. This is his friendship with John F. Kennedy. This is his wartime experience in the South Pacific. And equally wonderfully, this is also a measured, balanced, and extremely good assessment of everything else this guy wrote. The parts on Hiroshima are amazing. But so are the parts on everything else that he wrote. Most of the stuff that he wrote is not known even to people who love Hiroshima. And this book does a wonderful job in trying to fix that. I don't know. This is from Frost, Rush, and Giroux. Yes. I don't know what kind of distribution this will have. I don't know what kind of coverage it will get. Certainly, book section editors who want a hook in order to move forward with covering a biography. You can't get much better of a hook than Hiroshima. It's a universal book. Everybody has read it. And it's had a massive impact outside of the literary world. So maybe this will get more coverage than I think it will, but boy, oh boy, I think the last time we saw it, I had not yet read it. I cannot recommend it strongly enough. It's amazing. It's amazing. It's so much more than just a literary biography. It's a big, scooping, helping handfuls of the time. Just amazing. Just one of the best biographies I've read this year. And then the last book that I want to recommend, the last gasping session of our TBR torture, is something I wasn't really sure that I would like. I wasn't sure that I would even understand it. And I'm not sure that I understood it, but boy, oh boy, did I like it. And it's this. It's Colin Pask's Magnificent Principia in this lovely trade paperback. This is where Colin Pask walks readers through the Principia Mathematica of Isaac Newton. Walks them through everything that's going on in the book. Instead of writing, for instance, an introduction to a big new reprint with footnotes of the Principia itself, the author this is a reprint from a book he did a few years ago, and he makes the very wise decision to guide you through the book himself, rather than present you the book and let you sink or swim on your own. It's a very intimidating text, and it's maddeningly scattershot in a lot of ways. So even the parts that aren't intimidating for their science or their math are intimidating for their abstruseness. And he knows that. And it ended up being just an amazing reading experience. I want to read you a bit so you get a sense of what this author does with this famously difficult book. The legendary mathematical difficulty of the Principia can overshadow the totality of the work, something I hope to combat for readers in this book. The Principia sets out ideas, concepts, methods, and a formalism for dynamics. It creates a path through the subject of dynamics that is in large part exactly the one we follow today. To a certain extent, there must be a mathematical setting, but the mathematics provide a language and a tool so that it plays an essential but ancillary part to the whole experience. And he goes on to say, as we saw in the previous chapter, until Newton's time, most results were kinematic in form, totally motion-oriented. Kepler gives his three laws to define and characterize the motion of the planets. Galileo showed how projectile motion on Earth corresponds to parabolic paths. There was no underlying causal theory. Kepler gave three independent laws, and certainly there was no connection between Galileo's parabolas and Kepler's ellipses. Newton introduced the conceptual framework for dynamics. In particular, he introduced forces and a theory to tell how bodies in motion respond to the forces acting on them. There is also an important shift in viewpoint resulting from Newton's approach. Results such as Kepler's elliptical orbits or Galileo's parabolic projectile trajectories concern whole-of-path properties. Newton's law tells us what happens at a given point, how the current motion and the impressed forces dictate the immediate following motion. In mathematical language, Newton gives us a differential laws that we integrate to find the whole motion. And Newton showed the way this theory works for a whole array of forces and conditions. So it's clear prose, but it's not slowing down for you. And I love that. I learned so much from reading this book, that Newton was the first one to do what was just described. He's not working on what this thing does to this thing as I do it over and over again. Instead, he's creating a conceptual framework from which you can not only tell why these things do things to other things, but what will happen in the future. What two things that you've never heard of before. What will they do to each other? This is a way to know that. And I loved it. Just loved it. Didn't really follow the math, but I thought I just had a blast reading it. And I wasn't expecting that. So I highly recommend it, especially you science nerds out there. This is a book you can't miss. If you ever did miss it, if you missed the original edition, you can't miss this one. I'm so glad that it was reprinted. So there you go. That's a little TBR torture. We'll make a little Steve pile. So we have Magnificent Principia, and boy, oh boy, I love Isaac Newton's life story. I've read probably 4 or 5 biographies of him, and one of them, In the Presence of the Creator by Gail Christensen, I just love. I think it's a fantastic biography. But the work of the man, especially, I mean, the Principia Mathematica, the laws of motion, that was a small part of what Newton did. His work on optics was a small part of what he did, sticking needles in his own eyes in order to see what it did with the light. Those were small parts of what he did. He had an active public career and also lots and lots of scriptural writing and alchemy. But in those biographies of Newton that cover all of that, I always felt like the rest of it was maybe approachable, but that the math, he was in a world all by himself. And Colin Pask does a great job of explaining that world while at the same time confirming that, yes, when Newton was in that world, he was in a place that pretty much only he could understand. Just wonderful. Just wonderful. Then what else we got here? Oh, yes, Mr. Straight Arrow. A fantastic biography of John Hersey and the world he lived in. Then the strangest discovery I've had in months reading. This is Charlotte Bronte before Jane Eyre. But it's not just Charlotte. It's the whole family. It's the parents. It's the brother. It's the sisters. And it's wonderful. Just wonderful. Then we have 3 that I haven't read. So they're still TBR torture, but we'll see. If the first one is Truly, Madly, Royally, an Own Voices YA novel that I'm going to read and see. It's a debut, and I'm rooting for the author, so we will see. Then this thing, oh my God, The Presidents, in which C-SPAN gets together some of the greatest presidential biographers alive today and has them rank the presidents and write about them a little. And there's a meditation on the current occupant of the Oval Office. And there's a long introduction about presidents just in general. Oh, just a feast. Just a feast. And finally, Tidelands, which is a new historical novel from Philippa Gregory, the author of The Other Boleyn Girl. So, you know, it doesn't get much more of a welcome than that for an author. Philippa Gregory was long since. I've talked often on this channel about how writers will either create an escrow account of goodwill with me by many good novels, or they will empty that escrow account, and her credit is very good with the house. So we'll see what she has to do with Tidelands. But that's your TBR torture for today. Who knows? Maybe I'll give you a little break and not torture your TBR tomorrow, or maybe I'll be back. You never know. Thank you, BookTube.